Hello and welcome to Unhacked. I'm Brian Graff, Senior Vice President of Business Development here at Abacode. We're here every week to take you through a cyber topic of the week. We will cover the most recent hacks and security events and provide you with tips to prevent the hack from happening to you. Today's going to be a little bit different. Instead of covering a hack, we're going to cover the recent executive order signed by the President on May 14th regarding cybersecurity. If you have been watching any news recently, cybersecurity attacks are now the number one story headline on every news program. Back in April, the Colonial Pipeline, which distributes 45% of all gasoline in the U.S., was taken down by hackers. Last month, JBS, which is a meat packing plant responsible for 20% of all meat production plants in the U.S., was also taken down completely by hackers. So this highlights that our supply chains can be affected in the real world by cyber attacks. In response to this, the President issued an executive order in May that discusses specific requirements that organizations are going to have to comply with if they're going to supply services to the federal government. So what does an executive order do? It can express guidelines and offer a direction of programs that the President wants the executive branch to follow. Now, the executive branch is in charge of procurement for federal agencies, which includes cybersecurity and IT solutions. So what the President did is issue an executive order that will affect how government agencies buy cybersecurity services and IT services in the future. And because of this, that will trickle down into all of the vendors that supply the federal government, which are a lot, and then the vendors that supply those vendors. So these will eventually trickle down into all industries and private business as well. So what specifically does the executive order say? It has 5 major topics. The first is the establishment of requirement of incident reporting. Up until now, organizations had no responsibility from federal law or regulation to report a cybersecurity attack. Now, organizations under HIPAA and other laws are required to report when certain types of data is stolen, but they do not have to report when, let's say, a ransomware attack brings a network down or a system down, only when certain government data is stolen. This executive order changes that. So now organizations will not only have to report when an incident occurs, but they're also going to have to start reporting on their methods of preventing incidents from occurring and preventing and responding and remediating incidents once they do occur. Because remember, no matter what you put in place, no security program is going to be 100% effective. Incidents are going to occur, so it is very, very important that an organization has an incident detection and response process to quickly respond to these attacks. The second topic is the direction of federal agencies to modernize cloud infrastructure. Now, this is not as big of a change as the other directives in this executive order, as the federal government has been marching down this road for over 12 years at this point, trying to modernize the technological infrastructure that the federal government runs on. The federal government agencies are run on a combination of on-prem and cloud systems, some managed by the agency itself, some managed by private organizations like AWS and Microsoft. And the government has tried to implement programs to ease the application of third-party systems into government networks. So in order to sell a service to a federal agency, you have to have an approved service. And the way to approve cloud services is through a program called FedRAMP, which assesses cloud services for security prior to an agency being able to store data or use it to process government data. This executive order takes those FedRAMP requirements and applies them broader to federal agency vendors. Instead of just cloud providers, it's going to be broader, and more technological providers are going to have to comply with the assessment requirements and the reporting requirements. Now, the response for a smart organization that is already a vendor or looking to become a vendor of a federal agency would be to understand those directives of cloud modernization and implement those elements into their service, so that if they're going to the federal agency and trying to sell their service, they are already compliant with the requirements the agency is looking for. The third topic of the executive order is supply chain guidance. So, although FedRAMP has been around for a while, cloud solution authorization has been around, and it's very robust in its assessment process. It's a very difficult process to get through. Traditional software providers do not have to go through nearly as rigorous of an assessment process prior to an agency using their services. And this was highlighted in a very negative way recently with the SolarWinds attack. SolarWinds provides the software that these agencies use to monitor their networks, and that software coding process was corrupted by a third-party service that was hacked, and a malicious payload was entered into the SolarWinds package. Now, because that was not a cloud service, it did not go through as rigorous of a vetting process as a managed service would have. And unfortunately, that malicious payload allowed Russian hackers to access thousands of organizations' secure networks. In the future, to prevent that, more rigorous requirements are going to be placed over all technological providers, not just cloud providers. Some of the guidance that was issued that supply chain providers must follow are implementing vulnerability and integrity management in their secure coding process, so performing static code analysis, code review, validating data inputs and outputs during testing of the coding process, and a strict authorization process to restrict the ability to migrate code into a production branch to limited personnel and strict monitoring of that process. So organizations should be alerted whenever any change is made to their code branch. The guidance also states that a software bill of materials requirement must be implemented by federal agencies, meaning when they purchase technological goods such as SolarWinds or any sort of software package, that they know the components of that software package and the security requirements of each component, so that those can be configured prior to onboarding that solution, and it can be monitored on an ongoing basis. Third, critical software must be identified by the agency. The functions of that software must be identified, and additional security requirements must also be identified. So take, for example, SolarWinds. That's a critical software package that, if it doesn't operate correctly, can reduce an agency's ability to detect attacks and offers a vector for attack for hackers if it is hacked directly. That would be considered critical software, and additional testing and guidelines must be applied over it. And finally, the executive order speaks to specification of IoT and OT security requirements. So as we've talked, IoT and OT hacks can affect the real world, can affect our supply chain, our food production, our energy production, and the executive order is now requiring that specific guidelines be put in place to manage those products. So unfortunately, we're out of time. We are going to go over the last half of the executive order next week, but for now, that's all we have, and we'll see you next week on Unhacked.